Hello, this is Tommy Franks. Welcome to the 4-Star Leadership Podcast, a product of the General Tommy Franks Leadership Institute and Museum. We're here to get a view into the lives of the legacy makers, the movers and the shakers of today, to offer insights from the full spectrum of the leadership community. We'll talk to former 4-star students and explore their leadership development path. We'll work to find out what they are about today and learn from the opportunities they've made for themselves in this world. It's my distinct pleasure to welcome you to this podcast. Remember, leaders are not born, they're developed.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Core Principles of Leadership with General Tommy Franks. I am your host, Delise Travis. We're on episode number 23 with our guest, Bill Raaths. Bill is a Wisconsin native and credits his father and growing up on a dairy farm for mentoring great character and work ethic. Bill opens the door to his many life experiences, including his inspiration for higher education, the U.S. Army, and opportunities to manage large corporations that presented themselves along the way. A current chairman of the board of Great Northern Corporation, Bill will share his 3 principles of leadership: strategy, culture, and execution, and how a positive attitude is critical in building a spirit of entrepreneurship. He encourages listeners to take chances, get out of their comfort zone, be resourceful, and how to create value in what you do by doing what others can't or won't do. Before we get into our program, we'll have a word from our major sponsor, REI Oklahoma.
REI Oklahoma is proud to be a part of the General Tommy Franks Leadership Institute in the production and distribution of these podcasts designed to inspire leaders and difference makers. At REI Oklahoma, we have been working with small business leaders, entrepreneurs, and people who are driven to succeed for years. Highly motivated people working to own their own businesses, live in their own homes, and make the world a better place. Since its beginning, REI Oklahoma has continued to identify hurdles and deliver holistic solutions to create job growth and help neighborhoods thrive in both rural and urban communities. REI Oklahoma looks forward to visiting with you about helping your business and community grow. Visit reiok.org or call 800-658-2823 to start the conversation.
The LaBar family is a 4th-generation Oklahoma family. That may not sound like a long time, but our grandfathers were born here, within the Comanche Nation, before the land grants. We are the proudest sponsor of the Tommy Franks 4-Star Leadership Podcast. We hope listeners will heed the words of these distinguished men and women who have served our country at the highest levels and across all walks of life.
And now we join our special guest, Bill Raaths. In this episode, Bill Raaths discusses how growing up on a dairy farm in rural Wisconsin, his education, military service, and early job experiences gave him the confidence to lead 3 companies and own another. Bill is currently the chairman of the board of Great Northern Corporation, a significant player in the higher-end packaging industry. He had previously served as Great Northern Corporation's CEO, as well as CEO and president of sizable companies in the food and tissue industries. He started his career as an entry-level customer service employee after returning from Vietnam in 1971. Bill received a Bachelor of Science degree in economics from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and later earned his MBA at the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh and executive program at the University of Virginia Darden School of Business while working full-time. Bill is on nonprofit and for-profit boards. He has taught a strategy course at the university level and mentors emerging leaders within family businesses. Bill and his wife Natalie have been married 51 years with 2 adult married sons and 4 grandchildren. Good morning, Bill Raaths. We are so delighted to have you on our podcast to share your leadership experience, and thank you for being with us and welcome.
Thank you, Delise, and the General Franks Leadership Institute. I'm honored to be a part of your podcast series. The work you guys are doing to support new leaders is really excellent, and I applaud you for doing that. I'd also like to do a quick little shout out to our good friend Amy Pulaski for connecting me with the Institute. So thank you, Amy.
Yes, Amy is one of our great national advisors and a great friend to our leadership program. We appreciate her and her work very, very much. So, well, let's get started and learn more about you. And I like to start out about who you are and where you came from, because I think that is an important part of our makeup, is our childhood and upbringing and how that affected us and those experiences. So we have read your bio and we kind of know about who you are right now, but let's start back when. And would you share where you're from and to whom you were born, your siblings, and all of that? It's a great story.
All right, great. Well, thank you. Yes, I was born in 1946, so I grew up in the 1950s on a rural dairy farm in Wisconsin. Typical kind of farm in that era. About 100 acres, 35 Holstein cows, chickens, pigs, and all the works. Gardens and the things that made up a family dairy farm back then. I was the sixth of the siblings in my family. My five older siblings were all girls, so I was the only boy at the tail end there. And you can see how that panned out with my sisters. They probably think I was a little spoiled, but I'm sure that's not the case. Anyhow, we were, like I said, a very typical kind of family dairy farm back in that era. The farm was located in a small area outside of Green Bay, Wisconsin. The nearest town from the farm was about 7 miles. I know because I used to ride my bike over a big hill to get there. It was a population, I think, of 14 people. I believe it's down to 6 now, but it's still there. And there's still a local bar there, which was always a good stopping point for my dad. But we did all the kinds of things that you do on a dairy farm, 24/7. You get up, milk the cows, and take care of all the crops and everything else that goes with it. So, an incredible learning experience from work ethic, understanding, the nature, rotation of crops, the kind of things that, you become a naturalist, whether you like it or not. And it's all good. It's environmental and the kind of things that are really, really kind of core values, I think, coming through that kind of an environment. It was kind of the end of the small family farm era back then, as the big farms were starting to take over already, and lots of folks were selling their farms. And so I was, as the youngest son, it was kind of the heir apparent that I would take over the farm. My dad and mother were the third generation on the farm. They bought the farm from his dad, my father's dad. So it was, kind of all kind of falling in place, I guess, that this would be the case. As it turned out, though, I had a pretty severe case of asthma back then, and it's kind of hard to go up in a haymow when you can't breathe. So for me, taking over the family farm was just not in the cards. And there's some significance to that I'll just lay out now. We can come back to it later, but it was a bit of guilt. My parents were really good about never pressing that on me, that gosh, you are letting us down. They never once made that statement or intimation. So that certainly was, but it was, I felt some of that myself, especially when my dad had to eventually sell the farm because she no longer could physically run the farm anymore.
So, Bill, I have a question. Did none of your sisters or their husbands wanted to continue that?
No, they had their own lives, and their husbands had different engagements in businesses and other activities. So that was just not in the cards. So,
I understand. Our
yeah.
family went through the same thing. So,
yeah, okay. Yeah, it was when my dad sold the farm, I still remember it to this day. I mean, it was a very traumatic thing, as one can imagine, doing an auction with everything that he had worked for all his life, growing up there himself, and seeing that all come apart was very difficult. He actually had a nervous breakdown following that. So yeah, it was a difficult time. But eventually he got through it, and they had a good life thereafter. But it was tough. But the other thing that really came out of it, probably one of the most significant things as my career later on unfolded, was this real passion and desire to run my own business. People think of farmers maybe as not that sophisticated and maybe even not that bright, which I think is a travesty. But you run a farm, especially back then. It's a business. You're doing all the things that go into running a business. And he had a sixth grade education, but he was one of the most astute and solid business persons that I've ever encountered through my career thereafter. So it's instilled in me a desire, and part of it probably was just to tell myself that, hey, I can do this, whether it would have been on a farm or somewhere else. But it really instilled in me a driving desire to, at some point, run and own my own business. And I'll evolve on that a little bit later in the discussion.
Okay, so you were in high school. Was there anything in high school that encouraged you as far as what you were going to major in college? So you knew from that you were going to go on and to higher education. So was there anything in high school that inspired you for your first degree and where you went to school, that choice?
Yes. I guess backing up just a little bit, I attended along with my sisters who were older, had gone through the same thing, but we all went through a one-story schoolhouse, all 8 grades in one room actually. And I often say that I peaked early in my educational career, in that in the 8th grade I was the salutatorian, number 2 in my class. I don't often mention that there were only 2 of us in the class, but it was a small school, as you could see. My cousin was the other one. She was a valedictorian. She was much smarter. But so anyhow, that was kind of the transition then to the big town of a place called Bonduelle, Wisconsin. We had about 100 students in our class. And it was pretty typical, I would think, back then. There were probably half the kids were eventually going to go on to some form of higher education, and the other half would stay either on the farm or go right into the trades, whatever. So it was a pretty well divided scenario. I wasn't really in the camp of, hey, I absolutely sure I'm going to college. Only one of my older sisters went to college, and her husband became professors, and they were encouraging me to go it, and it certainly was a huge influencer. And so eventually, yes, I was gearing toward that end, but not really very pointed. My perspective on education back then, and even as it got into the other stages of my experience, was more in the broader scope of subjects, economics, geography, those kind of things, versus the harder core, more finite items like accounting and some of the other issues along those lines.
So you went on and got your degree in economics at the university in Wisconsin. So so I guess your desire to own your own business and be in management, was that the underlying inspiration?
Yes, I would say it was. I wanted a broader educational background, and econ was, I found really interesting, the whole supply demand issues and the related concepts that go into that. So yes, that was a big part of it, and it just really helped me move the needle forward on that regard. I'll give you one quick experience that I had while attending the University of Wisconsin in Madison. There was an opportunity for three white kids to attend an all-black university, Texas Southern University. So I applied. My experience with the black community at that point had been really seeing some folks on the Packers field or the Milwaukee Braves back then. So I just really felt it was important for me to better understand that culture and all of the issues going on. This was the Martin Luther King days and everything else. So it was a very tumultuous time. So it was really an incredible experience. I was, like I said, one of three in a all black university. The other two eventually dropped out, so I was the sole person there for the whole semester. Again, it just reinforced kind of those core beliefs in, gosh, we're all just people. We're all different backgrounds, but when all is said and done, it's important that we all think of ourselves as being equal and supportive of each other. And how do we develop on that concept?
So, tell us about then your, you got your MBA in Oshkosh, and then you went on to an executive program. Can you tell me what the inspiration and driving force was for moving on in higher education, and what inspired you?
Sure. When I graduated from college, it was in 1969, which was in the latter years of the Vietnam War situation. And at that time, I was seriously debating, do I go in? I knew I was going to get drafted. Do I go in as an officer, which I thought the concept of getting the leadership experience of being an officer would be very good. However, the fact that the war was winding down, it was very obvious that it was just a matter of time. So I ended up just going in the draft, became a medic in the Army, and spent a year in Vietnam. Later I was able to, it's a long story, but became a psychiatric assistant over in Vietnam. So I didn't spend my entire time in the field, if you will. But again, an incredible experience, having gone through that basic training and the medical training, and then eventually spending the rest of the year in Vietnam. It's a time I truly felt a significant growing experience. So when I got out, after that, it was like 1971. War was pretty well wound down by then. And when I got out, I immediately got a job with a paper company, a bathroom tissue company located in Green Bay, Wisconsin. I'd also gotten married at that same time to Natalie. So while I was working, I started working full time. I decided that, hey, I needed an edge. Again, back to this concept of eventually having the wherewithal, the background, the capabilities to own and run my own business. I got my MBA while I was working at the University of Wisconsin, Oshkosh. And later on, this was quite far down my career, but I had the opportunity to attend an executive program at the University of Virginia Darden School of Business, which was really great. Also, it really at the time it was perfect. I was early in my career, so I could really test myself against really some of the really top academic type people and others, business people in this particular environment. And it was an important part of this whole evolving process of getting confidence and understanding who I am and what I can do.
Absolutely. I believe that experience is what gives us confidence. And so I can certainly see the progression of your interest in business and business management that you witnessed as a child, watching your father manage all of the aspects of an agricultural or farming business. There are lots of key elements that play into each other in something like that, that all have to be weighed against each other. And there's definitely a trail to show how that inspired you. And then you went on to teach strategy.
I did. This was later on, kind of at the back end of my still working career, but I taught a couple courses in strategy in the MBA program at the University of Wisconsin, Oshkosh location. So that was very interesting. And, it's an interesting perspective, when you're teaching versus doing. So it kind of is a good way to, though, pull your thoughts together around that concept. So, but yeah, my career itself, I started out in, literally, at the lowest rung in customer service. And to this day, I'm so grateful that I had that opportunity, because immediately it exposed me to the customer side of things. You have to learn the product line. You have to really integrate with all the salespeople. And it was truly a wonderful experience. 3 or 4 years I spent in that role, and could have literally stayed with that first company forever. But again, I felt that this wasn't going to get me to my ultimate goal of owning and building a company. So I moved into other elements, got into the strategy side with that company, and then switched companies, got involved with a large company that had a strategy group, worked with them, and ultimately came back and got with a company back in the Wisconsin area that I eventually ran.
Now, was that the Anchor Foods when you were CEO of Anchor Foods?
This preceded that. My first total leadership position as a president was with a company called Wisconsin Tissue. We made napkins, bath tissue, and such for the commercial industry, selling to restaurants, businesses, and so forth. But a very, very vibrant business. And I was fortunate enough to work my way up to the top role in that company. Eventually, that company was sold to Georgia Pacific, a very large conglomerate corporation. I ran their away from home tissue business. That then eventually evolved. I would have had to move to Atlanta, Georgia, decided to stay in the Wisconsin area. At that point, then, I was fortunate enough to have an opportunity to run this really vibrant family business called Anchor Foods. We made poppers, if you ever heard of them. I was very instrumental in the tasting of that. I think I gained 10 pounds while I was there. But it was a wonderful experience, and just continued to broaden my perspectives.
Now, was that the first time that you worked with a company that also had a location outside of the United States?
Yes, it was.
Okay,
right.
So you got more international experience there.
I did. We had locations in Europe as well as in Mexico, and did a lot of traveling. I went to China and working with our guys to bring in new equipment, new technologies, and really was an extremely broadening role. I had done that also with the prior company, but this one was a further extension of that experience.
I can imagine that it was, because I know that in different cultures, different countries, they have different customs, and it affects what you sell them and how you package it. So I know that would be a great learning experience.
You're right. It was. And that evolved. And as it turns out, this company, Anchor Foods, which is a family-run company, the family eventually decided to sell that business. So I then moved to a packaging business where I'm still involved today, Great Northern Corporation, another incredible family business, over 700 million in sales, just a wonderful business. I was CEO with that organization for some years and retired, became the chairman of the board, which I continue to be today. So that, as you said, got evolving into the whole packaging arena, which is all about merchandising product and in-store setups and being attractive to the consumer or the buyers so that you can really, move your product forward.
I have a question about that, and I'm really curious as to how the culture of the paper company has changed since you've been in that arena. Because I know that in the 1980s, there was a big, huge push for recycled paper. And, it has really changed and evolved how we use paper products. And I know you've had to make a lot of changes with it, and you've been in that industry for a long time. Can you share that and share us as leadership how you recognized those changes and made those changes, maybe some of how your culture in the working industry
Sure
evolved with that?
Yes, that's a great question. The paper industry has very much evolved over time, back from when I started in the early 70s to where it is today. But I was fortunate in that my very first company that I joined, it was called Fort Howard Paper Company. Today, they're now part of Georgia Pacific. But they were really ahead of their time in that 100% of the materials that they used to make their paper that eventually was converted into napkins, bathroom tissue, toweling, and so forth, was from recycled fibers. So we were truly a leader in that area. And that certainly wasn't me. That was already in place when I got there. But it really continued as a sustainable way in which we could not only help the environment, but provide a good quality product with that whole sustainability in place. And that has continued to evolve. In my current company, Great Northern Corporation, we're right on that same front edge of providing packaging materials that are recyclable, not the plastics type of products. And it's just really, I consider myself very fortunate to have been with companies and industries where that was very much the method of production.
Would you say that whole push for recycled was customer driven?
Yeah, it was both cost and customer driven. In fact, to again my first days with the Fort Howard Paper Company, it was a low cost a way to make the finished product, and that kind of the best of both worlds. Not only is it good for the environment, but it also created a low cost opportunity, which is critical, especially if you're dealing in what we call the away from home arena, which is you're not selling in the grocery store type products. You're selling to, as I said, with to the restaurants, to other office buildings, those kind of establishments. So yeah, it really was a combination of cost and the environmental impact.
I was curious about that because I know that our communities today are looking to make sure that we are conscious of our earth and we are being good stewards of what we have. And it is a great concern and a comfort to your customer for that, to make sure that is happening. It's just a comfort to them. But then also I was curious that you said the cost was a friendly to the industry, because you would wonder if that was at a higher cost or if it made it worthwhile. So that's good to know.
Yes, and that does vary by type of industry, and but in our case, in the situation with the paper products and with the packaging as well, it certainly is a good co-model.
Let's pause for just a moment to hear from one of our great sponsors.
Hello, this is Jay Zacharias with the General Tommy Franks Leadership Institute and Museum, and I would like to tell you about one of our partner sponsors. His name is Justin Krieger, and he has worked as an independent insurance agent at Krieger Insurance Agency in his hometown of Hobart, Oklahoma since 1999. Justin is honored to help with the annual Celebration of Freedom event and has been a board member for the General Tommy Franks Leadership Institute and Museum for many years. He is also a fifth-generation farmer and rancher in Kiowa County, where cattle, crops, and even insurance is sold with a handshake. Give him a call at 580-726-3076 or come by the office if you would like to speak with Justin Krieger or Kathy Langford about insurance. We are thankful to our customers and friends who have supported us through the years. Again, Justin would like to say how honored he is to live in such a great country and how proud he is to help sponsor these podcasts. Please enjoy the rest of this podcast experience from your friends at Krieger Insurance Agency.
Now let's get back to our episode. So how did your leadership change from, you came into management really pretty early in your career. Can you share some of your thoughts on leadership and how you might have changed or evolved during all of this time? And how many employees did you eventually oversee?
Sure. So when my first executive leadership position was actually a fairly small company, only probably about 250 employees. And it was a subset of this Wisconsin tissue company that I mentioned earlier. And I can remember to this day, I don't think I did a very good job, frankly. I felt like I was very deliberate. I was slow to make decisions, just didn't have that confidence back then that you really need to make some of the hard decisions on products and other kinds of areas like that. So it truly was an important early learning experience, and fortunately it was in a small environment so that I kind of had that experience behind me when I was able to run much larger companies. But so I've had the rare privilege of running three large companies, each of which were in a different industry, which is quite unusual. Not circumstances were such based on the selling of the businesses, et cetera, that evolved. But it was really an interesting dynamic in terms of culture. And it really impressed me that it's important that the leader have a very strong personal set of beliefs and convictions, and has a strong feeling for the integrity of all the things that you're doing and so forth. But at the same time, I think good leaders will find a way to both understand and work within the culture of an existing environment, assuming that culture is a good one. Obviously, if it's not, then it needs revamping and changing. But for me, fortunately, the cultures were solid. So what my thrust was to work within those dynamics, and certainly changes were needed in some cases. We modified and built on them. But you can imagine the culture of a large tissue manufacturing company versus a food manufacturing company. very different. I mean, in one case, it was pretty straightforward, pretty basic, executionally oriented. The other case was very flamboyant. We went to the food shows and we would be popping these poppers across the aisles just to have some fun and stir up some good times. And I think a lot of leaders would have a very difficult time understanding and adjusting and melding their leadership style, not just being passive about the whole thing, but understanding where the pluses are and then building on it. So very, very critical part of the whole equation.
So I'm thinking you'd have to be very flexible in aligning your organization or your people with your vision and mission then in the different industries that you have experience in.
Right. And I just, when I was looking at the materials here with General Franks, the American soldier, with his 4 core leadership principles. I mean, it really is right on. In my strategy class that I taught and in my own thinking, I put it in 3 brackets, but they correlate very, very closely to General Franks' concepts. And I think of it as strategy, which it correlates to common vision in the General Franks mode. But right. Strategy, that's really all about making sure that you're playing in a sandbox that makes sense. I mean, if you're making products or services that aren't valued by the customer, then you're just not going to go anywhere, no matter how good you are and some of the other components. But so that was number 1. The next is culture. And again, correlating to General Franks, it would be the caring and character, very much part of what I refer to as culture. Understanding what that's all about and really making sure that in fact is the right position based on what you're trying to do within your strategy. And the third thing in my concept is execution, which would correlate to communication in General Franks' model. And again, that's critical. You can't just have pie in the sky ideas. You need to be able to execute, block and tackle, and make things happen. And it's just like you can't be perfect in all 3 of them or 4 of them in General Franks' case, but you have to be very competent in all. And it's in baseball, if you get 1 out of 3 right, you get in the Hall of Fame in terms of a batting average. In business or even in a general leadership context, you have to be able to do those 3 things right and make sure they are in fact clicking together for successful leadership, I believe.
I'm with you all the way on all of that, and I think it's really interesting how you were able to change your strategy for the different companies that you work for. And I think that's so important. One of the things that we haven't touched on is mentorship. I think so many of us are mentored or inspired by someone along in our career. Did you have mentors along the way that were really an inspiration for you, that maybe opened a door that you hadn't considered?
No doubt about it. And the first one being my dad and mother. They were wonderful, wonderful human beings, wonderful people, and just very nurturing and I was very, very blessed to be able to come out of an environment like that. And my dad, as I said earlier, as a business person, 6th grade education, yet a very bright, smart guy and really dedicated, passionate about what he was doing. So that was number 1. My first job with this company, Fort Howard Paper Company, had a real, this guy was hardcore. He was marching down the aisles and people would almost salute him. General Franks would understand some of this, but it was very much a hierarchical driven environment. That isn't my style, but I did learn a lot from him in terms of decision making and really driving driving things done. I was just watching this movie, Top Gun Maverick, and one of the comments that he made was, don't think, act. Uh, and it kind of reminds me back to my first leadership role where I was way too slow in acting. Now, maybe that should be modified a little bit, but don't overthink, act. But the concept is, leadership is an art. It's not a science. And we need to really understand that there's still that human element as part of that whole equation. I'm a big baseball nut, and it drives me crazy they could put a robot in the dugout today to run these teams with their statistics. Yes, use data. Absolutely. It's important. You got to be understanding of it, but there's still got to be a human element of the whole equation. So that was really one of the outputs of mentorship. Another very important mentor was with a company. The gentleman who ran the company was extremely customer focused. I mean, this guy could have written the book before all the books were written about that subject, and it just really rubbed off on me as that's ultimately what it's all about: getting that customer on board, taking care of them, being in front of their needs, getting a sales force that truly is passionate about serving those customers, and really an intolerance for anything that does not directly correlate with how do you become a successful enterprise serving the customer. We have a motto at Great Northern Corporation. We do things that others can't or won't. And it really puts it in perspective that we're going to be doing the things that make us a value to our customers. And I believe those are the kind of things that evolve there. So those are a couple of the mentors that I've had. I guess the last one I'd like to mention is the two gentlemen who started Great Northern Corporation. Had good jobs. They decided to take a chance and start up this packaging business from nothing. And it really inspired me. Their entrepreneurship is something that I absolutely value and respect. I think it's critical to a culture to have an entrepreneurial spirit and a drive that goes beyond the science, if you will, and that's part of the art as well. But it just really resonates that you need that spirit of entrepreneurship. And this was in a sports context, but there was a comment I just heard recently. A lot of people are really inhibited by the fear of failure. And if you've got that as a major roadblock, it's very difficult, I think, to do the things that it's going to take to be a strong leader and take some chances. It all isn't easy. You've got to put yourself in situations where you have to get out of your comfort zone and recognize that if you're going to make it to the next level or continue to be a successful resource leader, you need to be able to stretch beyond where your comfort zone might be. And I strongly would encourage new leaders to don't be excessively don't have an excessive fear of failure, but go for it and find a way to, in an entrepreneurial spirit, make things happen.
I thank you so much for all of those great words of wisdom, because you answered many of my upcoming questions. And so it was really great. Thank you for just taking that and running with it. Because we just discussed the other day about action is so important. Don't let the fear of failure paralyze you into not doing anything. Action is important. It's not going to be perfect, but if you do something, you can fix it, or you can learn from it. But if you do nothing, it's nothing. So I appreciate those great words of wisdom. What would you say to a young person just starting out their career? Our leadership students are average 17 years old and considering their futures, and they're very hard workers. What would you say to them for their pathway to success? Any words of encouragement?
Yeah, well, first of all, I really think a positive attitude is critical. I mean, who wants to follow a downer leader or anybody in those kind of situations? So, really, really look at things from a positive perspective. Personally, I think, a lot is said about the youth today, and a lot of negativity around that. I don't believe that. I think, there's leaders, there's good, solid, emerging folks coming out of it. I was recently at my grandkids, in middle school. They did a, tribute to, veterans. So, veterans who were parents or grandparents were invited in, and there was this assembly with about 700, middle school kids, and they were so respectful and so, positive in terms of their appreciation for what the veterans had, contributed, that it just really almost brought tears to my eyes because it was so inspiring in that context. So anyhow, I think there's a very important part of attitude is critical. I said it before. I just feel again that, take some opportunities to, stretch yourself out. And if you got some areas you're not strong in, speaking, uh, other areas, disciplines, find a way to immerse yourself in it. So you have to find your way out, build an avenue for getting to the next level. And if you don't do that, you're just really not going to move beyond a certain plateau. And, you can have a wonderful career, but probably not going to achieve the potential that you might have in leadership. And again, not everybody is going to be a leader. That wouldn't make sense. But, that would be certainly an important element, that I would strongly recommend. There's just a number of things. Something so simple as, a firm handshake and a look in a person's eyes. I shouldn't admit this, but I've actually hired people after, 5 minutes because they gave me that firm handshake and some, positive upfront things. But obviously, it's not that simple. But it's important, I think, to project yourself as a person that understands, the need to interconnect with people and, relate to people and build on relationships. Um, Finally, I guess the other thing I would say is, there's absolutely no tolerance. There should be no tolerance at all for any kind of, discriminatory type, mentality. I think there's an emerging thing which is a little bit concerning to me with, the woke culture. Some of the leaders coming out of some of the big universities and so forth, the elite schools, if you will, are getting overly, caught up in that side of things. There needs to be a balance, certainly, an intolerance for any kind of discriminatory, attitudes. But at the same time, we need the freedoms and the kind of things that enable us to be successful and move things forward.
Thank you for that. And I appreciate your thoughts on that. Experience builds confidence. To me, I think experience is the greatest confidence builder. And it's important to, if, as you said, if you're not comfortable with something, jump in it and get some experience and build your confidence in it so that you know what that's about. You mentioned something else about, you went to I guess it's your grandchildren's program at school. And I know that you have written a book specifically for your children and grandchildren. And it's not a book that is available, on Amazon. It's something that you've done on your own. Can you tell us a little bit about your book?
Sure. It's, I wrote it about 4 or 5 years ago, and it was really, kind of a long story. It's something I just wanted to leave behind. I've had some pretty incredible experiences, coming from it's, by the way, I titled it, Farm to Wall Street and Back, with the concept being, obviously, we can all reach, improbable heights if we really can go after it. But, I mean, typical, if you stereotyped a sizable business leadership person, it probably wouldn't be a kid who grew up on a farm, was 5'5" and weighed 140 pounds. It might have a little different perspective, but it's so irrelevant in the terms of what it is that really, what you got inside, what I call grit. To me, that's as important as anything. And that's part of that whole execution thing in my comments earlier. It takes some real determination and drive, I think, to not overcome some things, but more importantly, build on those and reach some both personal and community-wise goals. And then there's certainly an element of critical importance of giving back. And my family and I feel very strongly about that. We have obviously our own ways of doing that, but it all comes together as part of having such a blessed background and opportunities that have emerged in my life to build on those, hopefully mentor some folks along the way, like my grandkids, and then, and give back as we move forward.
I think that's great. And giving back is so important. And it's such an important part of servant leadership. And I appreciate so much that you took the time and made the effort, because it is a great effort to write a book that you could share with your children and grandchildren. And I know that even though it's not a published book available on Amazon and in bookstores, but you do have limited copies available. And we will share your contact information in our podcast notes, if that's all right with you.
Sure, that'd be fine. My son is got a printing business, so he's paying me back for his college education by printing my books for nothing. So that would be the cost of them. Nothing.
Okay. Okay, great. And so, as I mentioned, we'll share that in the podcast notes. If anyone is interested in getting a copy, they can contact you through the contact that we'll list there. Is there any one last thing that you would like to say to our listening audience that will help and encourage them in their leadership journey?
Gosh, I think I've hit many of the points, but
yes, you have. You've covered so many wonderful
right.
Thoughts. I just want to make sure that there wasn't anything left behind.
No, I think this concept of really appreciating our backgrounds and our what talents and things that we've been blessed to have emerge in our lives is really the starting point, and from there it's really up to us. God gave us those basic qualities, and if we're fortunate enough to have wonderful parents and backgrounds, it obviously makes it easier. But we all have talents and abilities, and we just have to build on what He has given us and do things that enable us to reach improbable heights.
Thank you so much for that. And I know, as you said, not everyone can be a rock star leader, for the entire world, but we can be a great leader in our own arena. And I think that's very, very important to find that place where we can really be a servant leader. And thank you so much. I appreciate all your words, and we've enjoyed having you on our podcast today. And I know that our listeners are really going to enjoy it and benefit from it.
Well, thank you very much. And as I said in the beginning, I'm truly honored to be part of this podcast series. General Franks is an incredible leader. His concepts and what you folks are doing to give back and provide strong leadership opportunities for all types of folks is very commendable. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And you have a great rest of your day.
All right. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Thank you again to REI Oklahoma for making this podcast possible. For nearly 40 years, the board, staff, patrons, and supporters of the nonprofit economic development REI Oklahoma are committed to expanding Oklahoma's economic prosperity, earning the reputation of being one of the most comprehensive economic development organizations in the country. Business loans, training workshops, business consulting, and networking opportunities, as well as technical assistance and even commercial business space, are made available to Oklahoma entrepreneurs and small businesses. For low and moderate income individuals and families, down payment and or closing cost assistance is offered. Learn more at reiok.org. This has been the 4-Star Leadership Podcast. Now it's your turn, 4-Star listeners. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and let us know what you thought of this episode. Be sure to give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcast and tune in next month for our next episode that airs every last Friday each month. Go be great.
The LaBar family is a 4th-generation Oklahoma family. That may not sound like a long time, but our grandfathers were born here, within the Comanche Nation, before the land runs. We are the proudest sponsor of the Tommy Franks 4-Star Leadership Podcast. We hope listeners will heed the words of these distinguished men and women who have served our country at the highest levels and across all walks of life.